The reason I even got involved in politics was because I became an Asian American community leader and got involved in civil rights organization. Over the years, people said, you can explain everything better than any politicians. You speak our language, you understand, why don't you run? The first thing I realized was, oh my God, most of the people I know would not be able to participate in something called a close the primary. It was extraordinarily challenging and discouraging for an immigrant community leader like me to have to spend that much time and resources to bring our people along. Now, Montgomery County, Maryland, which is the largest county in Maryland, over 1 million people, right? 1/3 foreign born. So the times have changed. We're no longer a bedroom community to Washington, D.C. This is who we are as a community. We need to face the music and update our election system. This is what America is all about. Any outsiders can choose to belong by stepping up. I am Delegate Lily Qi, and I am proud and excited to come before you today with national voting rights advocates and voters across Maryland to call for open primary elections in Maryland. I want to give my special appreciation for one of your members, Delegate Stuart Schmidt, for his leadership on this bipartisan bill. In 2018, I ran for state delegate in District 15 in Montgomery County, which has the state's highest concentration of Asian American populations. It should have been a huge cultural advantage for me, yet most of those voters were unaffiliated, making them ineligible to vote in Maryland's closed primary elections. Since the primary elections were the only competitive elections in our deep blue Montgomery County, those voters were essentially shut out of the election that would decide the outcomes, which is the Democratic primary election. As I stated in my Baltimore Sun op-ed back in November, our campaign had to launch a separate campaign to micro-target first-time immigrant voters to convince them to change party affiliation so their votes would matter in an election system not designed for them. We were proud of what we accomplished, but we shouldn't have to do that, nor should we force people to join a political party to make their votes count. HB 496 modernizes Maryland's outdated primary election system by allowing unaffiliated voters, often referred to as independents, to vote in party primaries without requiring them to affiliate with a party. Under this bill, a voter may request either the independent ballot or a major party ballot. Maryland is now home to about 1 million independent voters, which is about 1 in 4 registered voters. Think about this, 1 million. It's a staggering number in the small state with only 4 million registered voters. And the number is accelerating. Over the last 15 years, the Democratic and Republican parties' voter registration numbers have stagnated or even declined, while independent voters nearly doubled. In fact, Maryland added 50,000 independent voters just last year, while the two parties lost a combined about 40,000 voters in just 1 year. This reflects a national trend. About half of Americans now identify themselves as independents. This should be a wake-up call for both major parties to make ourselves more relevant to the growing number of people in the middle. So who are those independent voters? They are diverse in every possible way, and you will hear from many of them, including some veterans who fought for this country and fought for our rights, but are now finding their voting rights impeded by Maryland's closed primary elections. And many of them are also party-averse immigrants from countries where politics often evokes fear and distrust. Another fast-growing cohort of independent voters is young people. In fact, over half of millennials and the Gen Zs identify themselves as independent when they register to vote at age 16 in Maryland. The last thing on their mind is to affiliate with a political party. By the time they actually go to vote at age 18, they are surprised to find that they can only vote for the school board members, with all other options left intentionally blank. This is undemocratic.
Thanks for taking time out of your day for this conversation. It is a real pleasure for me to introduce all of you to Maryland Delegate Lily Qi. Delegate Qi is a state legislator. She's an immigrant from China. She's a rebel, and I'm not making this up. It's on her LinkedIn page. She's a champion for economic vitality and cultural inclusiveness, and she won a very competitive race back in 2018 and became the first Chinese immigrant in the Maryland legislature, as well as a member of the largest female legislative class in Maryland's history. She represents the 15th district, just outside Baltimore, and she has been an outspoken legislative champion for letting all voters participate in primary elections, as you saw from that video of her recent testimony. Welcome, Delegate Qi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Open Primaries team, for fighting the good fight. And it's my honor to join all of you for this movement.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I've really enjoyed reading your bio, but tell us your journey from Shanghai to Annapolis. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what gets you going in the morning.
Oh my God. This is an excellent question, but it's also something that I should say, be careful what you wish for, because I could write a book about this.
Sure.
So yes, I have a very unusual journey into politics. I grew up in China at a time of great political turmoil, when politics meant danger. Politics is something you survive, not participate in. And so it was a complete mindset change when I decided to run for office and had to bring my people along. But the short of it is I grew up during the Cultural Revolution, if you're old enough to remember what I'm talking
Right.
about. It was 10 years of turmoil and a lot of confusion growing up during that era. Things were turned upside down and very destructive. Excuse me. Then when China decided to open its doors to the rest of the world and started ushering in economic reform after the death of Chairman Mao, the country got on the path for economic development and political reform as well. That was when we were even allowed to leave the country and pursue opportunities. And about a decade earlier, due to Richard Nixon's work, a visit of China, and President Jimmy Carter's bilateral agreement with China, then we got people like me, young people, got to learn English and study abroad and had the opportunities. And I landed in the middle of, I would say, middle of anywhere, the cornfield of Indiana, where I learned about America, American cultures, and all of that. But over the years, I had always wanted to be fully integrated into American society. I told myself I didn't come here just to pursue economic opportunities, right? And over the years, as you go back and visit my home country, you see how China has been so decidedly progressing economically. And if you are only here for economic opportunities, you are losing out on the greatest opportunity in my mind for immigrants, which is political participation, to do what you couldn't do in your home countries, right? Because I like to say, after I got elected, only in America can you run for office and get elected by people who can't even pronounce your name. This is a system designed for outsiders, right? This is what America is all about. Any outsiders can choose to belong by stepping up. So during my election, and I have to preface by saying the reason I even got involved in politics was because I became an Asian American community leader and got involved in civil rights organization and all of that. And over the years, people said, you can explain everything better than any politicians. You speak our language, you understand, why don't you run? And I always brush it off until finally I just couldn't, hold off any longer. There was an opening in my district for delegate seat, and everyone was like, okay, this is your moment, go. So I'm giving you a super short version of that. And so the first thing I realized was, oh my God, most of the people I know did not participate in, would not be able to participate in something called close the primaries, because a lot of my cultural Chinese community friends, even though they have advanced degrees, very sophisticated analytical people, they did not know how the election system works. So I had to launch an educational campaign, in addition to going after the Democratic primary voters to educate them about how Maryland's system works and to bring them into the fold. And it was extraordinarily challenging and discouraging for an immigrant community leader like me to have to spend that much time and resources to bring our people along. And I saw the unfairness of the system, and I thought the system clearly was not designed for immigrants. Now, Montgomery County, Maryland, which is the largest county in Maryland, over 1 million people, right? 1/3 foreign born. So the times have changed. We're no longer a bedroom community to Washington, D.C. This is who we are as a community. We need to face the music and update our election system. So I promised our people that, one, they should have changed to Democrats so that they could vote for me and vote for whoever, is on the ballot and make their votes count. But I also promised them, after I get elected, I will push to change the system so they don't have to join political parties to make their votes count, right? So my point is, I feel so passionate about this because I know who I represent. I represent the voices that don't have a say in the process, the outsiders. And I want to continue my journey of pushing and promoting civic engagement among the immigrants who, like me, came here for opportunities and want to contribute as much as possible. I think, election reform, allowing more people to have a say in elections that matter, is not only a democratic thing to do, but it will drive more sensible policies when we have people in the middle to have a meaningful say in elections that matter.
Mm-hmm. And I apologize for getting bumped off. My internet is very unstable today. I'm not sure what's going
Yeah, I thought
on,
it
but
was something I
I'm back.
said, but
Hey,
it's okay.
no, Goblin. Hey, I had a theory that I wanted to run by you and get your honest reaction to. I'm give me your honest thoughts. I was thinking, I read an article recently, one of many, in which the author mentioned that 45% of Americans now identify as independent, but then went back to the old trope that independents are not really independent. They're just Democrats and Republicans light. And I was thinking that in preparing for this discussion, I read your Baltimore Sun piece. I looked at your testimony, and you talk about how deeply, deeply suspicious of party membership Asian American immigrants are, and immigrants in general, many Latinos, people coming from repressive countries. So that's what I wanted your honest opinion about. I think there's three main.
Uh-oh.
It looks like he got bumped off again.
Wi-Fi problem.
Yes. Hold on one second. Jeremy, can you jump in?
Yeah. Hi, Jeremy Gruber, SVP from Open Primaries,
Jeremy.
pinch hitting in John's time of need. Maybe Delegate Qi, I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but maybe you could talk in general about your experience in terms of immigrant communities in your state of Maryland, and more broadly in terms of how they come to seeing their independence and how that is finding its expression in your work.
Sure. Well, there are several dimensions to this issue, right? Because every state is different. Every state's demographics are different. But by and large, it's not just the Asian immigrants, it's the immigrants in general that usually are party averse. I mean, think about it. You come to a new country mostly for opportunities. The kind of opportunities your home country would not provide you. The last thing on your mind is to get involved in politics. It's because oftentimes politics is what drove them out of their home countries, right? So people try to stay away, and and plus there's language and cultural barriers and all of that. That's usually the last frontier for immigrants. So you already have to, whether it's a political party or election system, have to educate and engage and do the work to bring new people along, new Americans along, right? Encourage them to register to vote and all of that. And then you set up all these barriers with the primary election that require a lot of convincing and explaining. I mean, why are we making it so difficult for people to want to participate in our civic life while we are giving out beautiful rhetoric about how much we value diversity? Well, it's not just diversity of, you know, cultural heritage, it's the diversity of perspectives because of their lived experiences that should be used to shape our policymaking. That's the true democracy and diversity we should celebrate, right? So I have been very adamant about that, and I try to be the cultural bridge. I call myself a cultural broker to explain the Democratic Party platform, of course, because I'm a Democrat, because a lot of my people coming from former communist countries say Democrats sounds like socialists. You know, we left the socialist country. Why do we want to endorse that, right? So I explained to them I'm a different kind of Democrat because I speak your language. I understand the background. This is why, I believe our party is fighting for the little people and all of that. But even with this kind of convincing, I also want to deeply respect the fact that some of them just are not comfortable joining political parties. But they are good taxpayer citizens who should have a say in policy matters, right? And I, want to assure them that I will, on the one hand, want to convince them to make their voices count in the immediate next election, but also at the same time, I promise them I want to push for election reform. And over the years, I introduced the different versions of a reform bill that is not outright open primaries because I didn't feel there was enough political will to go that far. My first bill for multiple years I introduced was simply allowing people to change their party registration from unaffiliated to affiliated during early voting when we still allow in-person voter registration. And even that did not pass. Election reforms are hard. But I kept pushing, and then this year it looks like it's going to move, but it's sponsored by a different colleague. So it looks like we're taking baby steps to kind of make some incremental changes. But as I said, this is not just an Asian immigrant issue. It's a lot of immigrants, from even African countries, especially Latino countries. Many of them lived through different regimes and political systems. It is an issue that America needs to confront now, with nearly half of Americans claim to be independent. And I think, I don't want to put words in John's mouth, but he was starting to talk about several categories of people in independent camp, right? It's a growing camp of many disenfranchised people, no matter whether they were American born or not, who chose to be independent. And there are people like my kind of people from different cultures and immigrants, right? Or people just who are innocently moving from Virginia, our next door neighbor, or as far as California with open primary systems and didn't think they need to register with a party or whatever. For all kinds of reasons, people could be independent. And yes, some of them could be left-leaning, right-leaning, but they made a choice to be independents, and we need to respect that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've been struck by, Delegate Qi, is that from the start, you framed this argument as a voting rights issue, as a civil rights issue. That has not always been the case in a lot of places where these arguments have taken place. And in fact, at the hearing last month, I was sort of struck by the fact that the contrast between the hearing on your bill, where you had 24 Maryland independents who showed up to testify in support, but that the support was largely regular Americans, regular Marylanders. The previous bills prior to yours were largely testified to by a revolving group of civil rights groups, very legitimate, very important legislation. But these were clearly professional advocates who lived at the State House and who testified before multiple bills, and interestingly decided not to stay and testify for your bill.
Yeah.
So how do you put that together? We've been trying to build interest and connectivity between this issue as a civil rights issue, but how do you see it, and how do we break through that barrier where you have these, long-standing civil rights groups that are still not quite seemingly ready to embrace this as part of the issues they work on?
Yeah, this is a disappointment because over the years, even for the bill that I mentioned, that was really a much lighter lift, right? Um, I had to push and nudge very hard, especially on the Democratic side, because we are the supermajority in Maryland, right? Um, to say, I hope the party will issue a letter of support or whatever. And I had different revolving door of supporters, organizational supporters, meaning, organizations like a League of Women Voters. And depending on their leadership, sometimes they came out to say, of course, we support more people being able to vote. But this year, for some strange reason, they only issued a letter of information, like a staying neutral, which was disappointing. To me, no doubt, this is a civil rights issue. And I have heard from people from my own party who are very progressive part of my party who are saying, in this kind of climate, when our democracy is under existential threat by this administration at the federal government level, I'm not open to that idea of open primaries because I want to make sure we protect our progressive values and blah, 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 right? To me, that is not a strong argument. It's like at the end of the day, what are we afraid of? That everybody can vote, right? Um, it, Voters should choose their representatives, not the other way around. We can't say we have such brilliant ideas and great policies that are good for you, but you are not allowed to vote for these good policies. But they are good for you, just trust us, kind of thing. I think that is kind of the kind of arrogance that we need to stay away from. We need to, if our policies are that good, we need to allow people to have a say.
I couldn't agree more. I think I saw John back with us. John, are you there? Did we lose him again?
We had him and then we just lost him again.
The elusive John.
All right. Well, I've been bumped up. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, Delegate Qi, you mentioned that you've been working on other bills, and you felt the moment was right to take the leap on an open primaries bill in Maryland, even though the fight is obviously an uphill one. Why is now the right moment, not just in Maryland but in the country, to really start debating this issue more concretely in state legislatures?
Well, and I think it is precisely because as a Democrat, I am deeply concerned about the state of our civil society in America, the state of democracy in America, that I feel this is an existential threat. And in order to protect our democracy, we can be echo chambers. We have to let the growing number of independents see that they have a meaningful say in whatever level of government that represents them, right? When people don't feel like there is a chance for their voices to be heard or represented, they get angrier, they get more disengaged, and they get more divided. We're not contributing to the cause. I think every American should be rightfully concerned about the state of our democracy and the fact that we are so divided between the blue and red states. And the best way to do it is to bring people in the middle if we want to bring politics to the best way to bring politics to the middle is to bring the middle into politics. That's what I want to say, right? We can lock people out and expect to just push through our policy agenda, which is why I feel so strongly about this. This state of affair is deeply disturbing to me when Americans are increasingly turned off by partisan politics and they are voting by their feet. They chose to register as independents. And now the two parties, in order to maintain our relevance, have to go after a shrinking base, basically. And that is not healthy going forward for America, for our economy, and for our civil society.
I couldn't agree more. I want to peel back a little bit about your experience having introduced this bill, because, it was not an easy decision, I know, to take this leap forward. It's not, legislative bodies are difficult places to work in when you're trying to be cutting edge, and particularly when you're pushing back against sort of the status quo thinking of your own party. What has been your experience since introducing the bill and since the hearing? What do you don't have to name any names, but what are the conversations you're having with your fellow Democrats and Republicans? What are you hearing from constituents? How is this resonating in Maryland? And do you feel it is starting to push the conversation forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is going to be a long journey. I feel there is starting to the idea of open primaries is starting to gain some traction among leaders I have spoken to. Very few people say it outright that they think it's a terrible idea. Some are concerned administratively how that could work. Others are saying, what I mentioned to you, as a progressive state and county, how that would affect our bottom line. Others propose that we do it alongside ranked choice voting, but more and more people are paying attention when I try to push the idea and get their interest, because these are influencers, opinion leaders, or legislators whose support I need. I see diminishing pushback and growing support. And I think you could see for yourself that night when we stayed extra long hours and testifying. I think the legislators, despite the wee hours, were attentive and they were serious. I think they were open-minded about that. Whether or not we can, get it done in a couple of years, I kind of doubt that. But I do see more people from both parties being warm to the idea that some kind of reform is needed.
I want to go back to that hearing because, it really was such a contrast. I experienced at least, and I'm curious the conversations you're having with fellow members of the Maryland legislature around every other bill that was heard before yours had a professional class of advocates
That's right.
testifying in support. Your bill had 24 regular folks who had to give up, because this was a very long hearing, had to give up hours of their own time on a work day rather than the professional advocates. They're getting paid to be there. They're fine. But you had 24 people come up and just talk very wholeheartedly about how they personally, not as advocates for an organization or a cause, but as advocates for themselves, how they were experiencing that. And it was a really strong difference between that and the other legislation. How did you experience that? And how do you feel the legislature experienced that? Because we're working to elevate and organize independent voters' voices and hold different types of contexts. And it'd be really helpful to understand how that's resonating.
Yeah, I was very moved. In fact, when I first started working with you and we had this Baltimore Sun op-ed, I circulated among some friends. They were all like, oh, this is great op-ed and let us know how we could help. And this, I didn't think uh, so many people would warmly respond to that. After the op-ed was published in Baltimore Sun, I got quite a few random emails from people I had never met and said, I want to be part of this. Are you going to introduce a bill? How can I support you? Something like that. So we just basically put all of the names on the list and then reached back out once the hearing was scheduled. And also I appreciate you pushing out my bill's information and encourage participation. But I was particularly moved by how our veterans groups were so well organized and spoke so powerfully. I didn't think of that until the hearing, that our veterans have very strong reasons sometimes to stay nonpartisan because, as they said, we fought for the freedom of and rights for this country. We pledge our allegiance to the country, not to the parties. And that was very powerful to me. And I was incredibly moved, especially because one of them actually flew across the globe just so that his voice could be heard in his home country. Um, I was just speechless with gratitude, how people deeply care about. And you're absolutely right. It was it was just like the whole group of professional advocates right before us. And then when our people came and spoke, the legislators really paid attention because they were heartfelt, they were genuine.
We're going to go to questions in 1 minute. But I wanted to, my last question is about you personally, Delegate Qi, because you've really quickly kind of risen and embraced this public role as a leader and a spokesperson and a fighter for independent voters and for open primaries generally. How do you see that developing in the future? What's the road ahead for you in terms of how you're thinking about this issue in Maryland and more broadly?
Wow, that's another great open-ended question. I don't have an exact answer. I called myself a rebel because I think differently. I don't necessarily always toe certain lines. And that was exactly why I wanted to run for office because I have different lived experiences and perspectives that need to be heard and be part of the policy making process. Will continue to push, but I don't know, when the bill will pass. I will push from every angle possible, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for open primaries and for your leadership and John's leadership in working with us in bringing others along. It's great to know the data from other states. It's great to know the strategies by other lawmakers across America who have pushed for open primaries. That's incredibly encouraging. I'm glad we're connected on this so I don't feel lonely in waging this fight for the invisible voices and disenfranchised voices. As I said during the hearing, this year, this election year, 2026, when the state of Maryland will be electing not only, this midterm election for congressional representatives, which every state would do, but we also have a state and local gubernatorial election, like in most states, right? So it's really all the more important to drive home this point. But also this year, we know for a fact there will be tens of thousands of more Marylanders that will be disenfranchised compared to just last election because the number is accelerating, and that is unacceptable. So to go back to your earlier question about why now, because the trend is going faster than we wanted to see, right? So we just have to face the music and to face the reality. So I'm optimistic that this is the direction the country is going. We are only 1/3 of the states that have not gotten on with the program, and I have to remain hopeful. Whatever voice I can land on whichever platform, I'm happy to do that because I do have deep convictions about how we can build a strong democracy for all people.
Well, yeah, you must be doing something right, Delegate Qi, because there's the state of Delaware, your neighboring state, is hearing a bill very similar to yours this week. And this has actually been one of the strongest legislative sessions on the open primaries issue more broadly that we've seen. And I think that's a large testament to your work and to other leaders who are pushing this issue in state legislatures around the country and forcing these conversations because they're really important ones. I want to go to questions, and Russ, I'm going to have you call on folks.
Got it. Great. We'll start with Melanie in Maryland has a question about young voters being motivated around this issue.
Hi, Delegate Qi. Thank you so much for your bill, and it was fun coming. It's good to see you too.
Yeah.
I was surprised by the number of young people who came to testify, high school students, college students, and how articulate they were. First of all, why do you think so many young people are choosing to become independents? And number two, what can we all do to try to get more of them to join our cause and fight for open primaries?
Well, not being a young person myself, I can only second guess. This is a world where I like to jokingly say, a generation or two ago, your greatest concern is after college, you may not get a good job, right? But now your greatest concern is there may not be a habitable planet for you to inherit. There are some existential threats to humanity that a lot of young people feel that pretty pessimistic about the state of politics, the state of affairs, and just a lot of things that put a lot of stress on their mindset. I don't know joining a political party is a proven path of success for them or proven path of identity for them anymore. They see the failure of politics, and that probably is one major reason. They're looking for some new ideas that would actually work beyond the politics as usual. And the Congress has been called a broken branch for good reasons because they're not a good example of how democracy works these days, right? And that's one reason. Another, I think, is like for the state of Maryland, for example, we allow um, 16-year-olds to register to vote. Of course, they cannot vote until they actually turn 18, but they can register at age 16. At age 16, I don't think many people think about joining political parties, right? They are just happy that they are registered. Or when they get their driver's licenses, we have this opt-out thing. You have to opt out. Otherwise, you automatically opt in as a voter when you get your driver's license. So people think, okay, I'm registered, right? And that's the end of it until they actually have to vote. And then they realize that, oh, there's this nuance there that nobody adequately explained to them. So it could be, the mechanics of registration. And now Maryland even has something called the same day voter registration. In other words, we even allow people who have never registered to just show up last minute and register with any political party and pick a party ballot, right? So that to me is very close to just allowing everybody to vote. Why not just open primaries? If you even allow people to register last minute and pick a party ballot, what's the difference, right? Because the excuse to open against the open primaries, one of the excuses from the election administrators was we can't predict how many people, blah, blah, blah. But if you allow, same day voter registration, you still have to take a guess. Yeah. So I can't really exactly pinpoint why, but I can guess, from what I know about the young people these days, why they are turned off by politics as usual and chose not to affiliate.
Thank you,
I'm going to
Melanie.
ask a follow-up question, actually, because I've been curious about this, and I'd love an insider's take, Delegate Qi, is the parties aren't blind to what's going on in the country. They're not blind to the fact that they're losing voters. They're not particularly young people. How are you experiencing those conversations within the party in your own state? How is the party responding to those challenges? It's clearly not to embrace open primaries, but are they honestly taking an appraisal of what's happening in this country, or are they sticking their heads in the sand?
Well, I think political parties' first job is to win elections, no matter how, right? It's their job to win elections. And maybe sometimes it's easier just to do the same thing that they already know how to do, by using the same group of consultants cycle after cycle. And, I can tell you honestly, sometimes I bring up the issue of open primaries. The first reaction I heard from a couple of colleagues was, oh, I'm going to lose my election if you do that. And it's the first thought is to preserve themselves instead of doing what's right for democracy. And that is very both natural and unfortunate a fact about politics, right? A lot of elected officials in positions think about their next election oftentimes whenever you want to change election policies. It is unfortunate, but that's also a fact. Which is why you have so much resistance. Because if you already have a reliable group of people whose doors you have already knocked in the last cycle, any change to the election system like this will create a lot of uncertainties of who can vote for you, right? And that is threatening to the incumbents. It's going to be costly to them when they have to spend more money reaching out to more voters and knock on more doors and don't know where people actually stand on issues, right? But the flip side, which is what we have currently, creates this party purity test and this echo chamber that is driving people further away from the middle and creates more division. And it's just, creates more toxicity that turns people away, which is certainly not the way to go for long-term health of our democracy and our republic.
Mhm. Thank you. Russ, you want to go to our
Yeah,
next question?
thank you, Melanie. I'm going to go to Lou Hinman, had a question in New York.
Oh yeah, thank you. I'm not sure I actually have a question. There are some questions I would like to ask, but more importantly, I wanted to say I have been an activist for open primaries for many years, and I've worked recently with Kathy Stewart in open primaries. We work to bring um, to organize people to let them know about the hearing in Maryland for your bill, Representative
Excellent.
Qi. And no sooner was that hearing take place than we heard about a similar bill and a similar hearing in the state of Delaware, right next door to you. I just wanted to say, as somebody who's been active for open primaries for many years, that I feel so inspired about the quality of the leaders at the grassroots who are coming forward and taking leadership. Um, I felt that we worked in Oklahoma uh, for uh, uh, for a ballot resolution to put um, uh, completely open primaries open on the ballot to actually completely change the system. Um, the jury is still out in that what's going to happen there. But I just feel like your leadership is so wonderful to see, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lou.
I'm going to
Russ?
go to Bruce Wilder, had a question about closed primaries and the First Amendment. You have to unmute yourself, Bruce.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, there you
Yep,
go.
go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, well, I just posed the question. I will put a link to an article I wrote, but I would love to hear some thoughts. There was one reply. But I think with McCutcheon, Chief Justice Roberts, and it's dictum, it's not that wasn't necessary to decide the case. But I just wonder what other folks thought about that. And I'm going to post a link, as I said, to an article I wrote.
What about it more broadly, Delegate Qi? What do you think about sort of the right to vote as a constitutionally protected right? It's not obviously specified in the federal constitution, but it's been constructed, certainly specified in a number of state constitutions, including Maryland, which has a specified right to vote. And it is worth mentioning that there is litigation, of course, right now in Maryland that is looking to explore a challenge, a constitutional challenge under Maryland's constitution. How do you think about this from a rights perspective in terms of the Maryland Constitution and more broadly as an American issue?
Well, I think if the Maryland would be, I think Maryland would be smart to get ahead of this lawsuit by addressing the issue legislatively, right? Because otherwise you have to face the lawsuit, which is already ongoing. So I think we are pushing for change from every angle, basically, both litigation by you guys, but also I hope legislatively we can address this issue. Because it is time, to face this dynamic, and I do believe it is a constitutional basic right, as you mentioned earlier. I do want to frame this as a civil rights issue, which is why are we locking out so many people registered out of publicly funded elections? These are not party nominations really in nature. They are not private elections. They're publicly funded and administered elections, right? Where all voters should have a say. So I just don't think there are many logical reasons to continue to do that other than inertia, other than habits, other than just maybe laziness sometimes, because we know how to do it and we just continue doing it. But the time has passed for us to really be serious about this.
You know, we talk about this, makes me think, Delegate Qi, you know, we talk about this all the time, of course, that primaries are taxpayer-funded elections.
Yeah.
They're run by state and local government. They're in all respects public. And that obviously resonates with the public. I'm curious, though, it doesn't, you know, within the Democratic Party of Maryland, with conversations with your fellow legislators, how does that part of the argument impact with them? Do they recognize that these are public elections, or do they continue to hold to the idea that despite the fact, you know, everything we just discussed, these are actually still private? How do folks talk about this within the State House?
Interestingly, every time I bring up the fact that these so-called party nomination close the primary elections are essentially tax-funded public elections, right? Even people who are adamantly at first against the idea of open primaries say, okay, well, I can't argue with that, right? Because that's a fact, okay? So that actually is a very good argument. However, there is another technicality that they are kind of latching on right now, which is the constitutionality of only allowing unaffiliated to choose any party ballot, one of the two party ballots, without allowing the Democrats or Republicans to choose any party ballot. Okay.
Interesting. Well, there's actually a court cases that have looked at that, and what they found, at least the current law, is that because an independent voter is independent, the act of picking a party ballot, right? You choose a Republican ballot or you choose a Democratic ballot. That act is sufficient to show affiliation for purposes of a constitutional argument. And that's what the courts have found so far, is that that it's not the same. You're not necessarily a member of the party, but you've shown sufficient First Amendment associational connectivity to survive a challenge in that area.
Yeah, well, you know, that was what I heard. It's not the official opinion, of course. I didn't seek an opinion from the court or whatever, attorney general, whatever. I just want to push through because I'm fighting for my people who don't have a voice. You know, I lived through the nightmare of having to run 2 concurrent campaigns, which makes this very progressive, deep blue state look so ironically, you know, outdated in our election system of exclusion, you know, in my mind, right? Because the people we are excluding from the system are the very diversity that we want to celebrate.
I want to go, I'm not sure the question, but I'm going to go to the questioner because I trust he's got a good one. I want to go to Dennis from Maryland because Dennis was one of the folks who testified.
Yes. He's our hero.
Dennis also, for those of you who didn't watch the whole hearing, which I don't begrudge you, Dennis flew perhaps the farthest that anyone has ever flown to testify in a Maryland hearing, all the way from Qatar. So Dennis, I want to go to you with your question for Delegate Qi.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes. Hi.
Excellent.
Hi,
Delegate Qi, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
I'm putting my other earbud in. I'm living life real here. I got my daughter at the orthodontist and I stepped out. For those who don't know me, Dennis Filipavage, I came to testify, like you said, and I live in Havre Grace, Maryland, ma'am. That's where I'm from. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but I've been in Maryland for 15 years. Military member, retired December 2022, 27 years, multiple combat tours, military pilot by trade. I was an Army medevac pilot, so I was in the life-saving business, and now I'm an airline pilot. And like I said, on the day of the hearing, I flew from Doha, Qatar to Philadelphia, and I landed that morning. And then I had a friend drive me down to Annapolis to ensure safety because I was definitely tired. And waited there all afternoon, but it was worth it. Question for you, ma'am, and for the audience here, because there's a lot of smart people. One of the things that inspired me was the movie Majority Rules, and I know I've talked to you about that, ma'am. And to me, just watching the open primary process in conjunction with ranked choice voting really seemed like the gold standard to me. And in the movie, it shows how it obviously lowered the political temperature greatly. And from there, that was one of the inspirational things to me. And like we're doing here in Maryland, we're doing it one step at a time. But in my process of learning, I'm hoping that we could find that system here in Maryland and obviously across the country. But no matter what, I still would love you to watch the movie when you get a second. And obviously your thoughts on going fully open primaries or ranked choice down the road, and obviously that's a little bit above what we're trying to do here. But again, thank you for your leadership. And one of the things that I'm trying to do out there to keep the movement growing, and I inspire everybody to do on the phone, is just simple conversation. Just keeping the conversation going, from where I do and where I work, and to my daughter's school, to the activities. Just keeping the conversation going about opening Maryland primaries, I think, has been really helpful. And I've been trying to do everything I can to get everybody involved, and hopefully that's helping you, ma'am, with this bill. So anyway, thank you for your minute. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was so moved both by your words and by your action of how committed and serious you were about this. I think everyone on the committee was just like me. So really, thank you for your service in many different ways to our country and to our democracy. It means a lot to us.
Thank you, Delegate Qi. Thank you very much.
And
And
as
if
I said to my colleagues, we only need to look to our next door state, Virginia, right? They have a completely open primary system that does not require party registration at all. So if anyone questions what I propose in terms of constitutionality of only allowing an affiliated to pick a party, then don't require party registration. Let people self-identify and pick party ballot. And Virginia is not in hell. In fact, their economy is the envy of the state of Maryland, right? They are doing just fine. Of course, every state has our challenges, but it's not broken as a state. They're doing very well, in fact. So I don't think we should let fear get in the way of that.
I agree. One thing that I like to say is competition makes everything better, including our politics. Yeah. And if a political party has the best idea, they shouldn't be afraid to compete for our votes. That makes everybody
Absolutely.
better.
Right. And it was hard for me to explain to my people, especially because they said, okay, look, Maryland is very much of a one-party state, and we lived through one party. Why should I vote for Democrats? Because that's not right. It's undemocratic. And I couldn't argue with them about the need for a robust and more competitive system because they lived through a system that didn't work, right? So it was really hard, and that was another drive for me to say it's not right. We have to change.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. And if folks who haven't seen it yet, Dennis has a great video up on Open Primary social media.
Yes.
Russ, maybe you can
You
drop
want to post a link, Dennis? Just put it in the chat.
I'll put it in the chat for sure. I wanted to go, we had two people, Pat Leibowitz and Reed Harrison, both had questions, specifically what can be done in Maryland to support the next steps, and also broadly in other states where there's what can be done from people on the call. They want to.
Great question.
I'll let you jump in, Reed, if you want to clarify any of your question. But
yeah, I think basically, in a sense here, Delegate Qi is our customer, right? What can we do to help her and like-minded elected representatives succeed in their quest for open primaries? You kind of look back at us and say, boy, I wish they were doing the following to help me and help this cause. Why aren't they doing this, that, or the other thing? And perhaps there isn't anything. And quick to add, I'm not criticizing any organization here, Open Primaries or anybody else. It's seeking to learn from somebody we're passionate about helping. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Are you in the middle of the sentence or are you done?
Oh, I'm done. Sorry. Over to you.
Sorry. Yeah. So to the question about what can be done in let's say the state of Maryland, right? I am hopeful because we have a new speaker, and the new speaker, the first Afro-Latino immigrant who is very, very proud of her immigrant heritage. And I had a conversation with her before I introduced the bill to say, I hope you will be open-minded about open primaries. It is a major change to our election system, but the time has come because of the people that you and I represent, right, of the roots we came from. So the fact that a previous iteration of my bill, which is to allow people to affiliate with the party last minute, sort of during early voting, that is progress. And I know the bill is getting out of the committee. So that to me is actually a huge step forward to the right direction. So I'm hopeful that we are finally more warm to some kind of reform and some kind of inclusive measure to make our election system more friendly to outsiders. And of course, with the new committee structures and the changes, I think our governor, at least, is open-minded about that. He even recently in his New York Times interview talked about, he said the current state of affairs in terms of democracy is not about, the left or right, it's more about in or out. There are people who are inside the system, outside, those who participate and those who don't, right? And that's basically what the state of affairs is. And it's getting worse because of the current system. So I think more leaders are getting it.
What can either the people on this call or the organizations they represent help you get more support for your bill?
Yeah,
and
great.
what can we do now?
Yes. So I would say talk to the speaker and the Senate president and the governor. But if it starts with legislature, then we need to talk to the top leadership of both branches in the state of Maryland and the committee. We have a new committee that oversees elections and labor and government operations. It's called the GLE, the Government, Labor, and Elections. So that is a brand new committee that was just set up a few months ago by this new speaker. They oversee election matters. Talk to the leadership that committee, and the good colleague, Republican colleague who co-sponsored this bill with me serves on that committee. And so focus on those people. And if you live in the state of Maryland, talk to your representatives to push for that idea, because most likely I will have to use your voice again to push for next year, right? This is just the first year I'm introducing this bill. We should regroup and re-strategize to come back next year to keep the momentum going.
And I just wanted to jump in and introduce Kathy Stewart. She's on the call today. She's a national organizer here, and she's been doing work in Maryland. So just want to introduce Kathy, and she can quickly say if people are interested, what they can do to reach out to her.
Wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Russ. Can everybody hear me? Thank you, Delegate Qi. It's just great to have the opportunity to spend some time with you and hear how you see this issue. And Reed, maybe I can answer your question. One thing we are doing, which builds on what Delegate Qi is doing, it suggested, is we have an active letter writing campaign to the members of the GLE. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to our website, Let Us Vote Maryland, and you can do it right there. And if you'd like to stay in touch, and everyone from around the country, if you know people in Maryland, please share the link with them and sign up, because we're doing a lot of work on the ground with letters to the editor and efforts to make independent voters more visible, which I think will make this issue even harder to turn away from. As Delegate Qi, as you're saying, these numbers are growing, independent voters are growing, and we just need to be visible and making demands that we have equal voting access. Thank you, Delegate Qi.
Yes, no, thank you. This is spot on. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Russ, you want to choose someone to take us out?
Yes. Steve Haney had a question just on the specific logistics in Maryland for the bill.
Okay.
Steve,
if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I don't know if there he is. Steve, looks like you're off mute. but I don't hear you. So I'm going to go to John Eldon had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we should be focusing more on the fact that the Constitution, that the founders really envisioned a system of independent voters, independent representatives, no career politicians, etc., and how we get back to that sort of concept.
I'm not quite sure.
Well, maybe Delegate Qi, you could talk more broadly, because I've seen in the chat there were some questions about other forms of open primaries, other ways of thinking about bringing independent voters into equilibrium with every other voter. Have you thought about other systems? Have you had conversations about other systems? How are you thinking about this issue in terms of its evolution in Maryland, and what policy we should be focused on?
Well, I'm open to any policies that make the state of civic participation easier for people and the more inclusive. So I'm not wedded to one particular idea. I think my bill this year simply is to allow unaffiliated, the growing unaffiliated, an option to vote party ballot. But it could be any system, whether it's Virginia system, which does not require party registration at all, or California system, or whatever. I think realistically, given Maryland's politics and the party imbalance, right? We have a lot more Democrats than Republicans. I don't think the Republican Party would like the California system, because that means they probably won't have a say in the November election at all, if you pick the top two voters of any party. So, I think every state will have to come up with their sensible idea, which is why I think this particular bill I am trying to advance makes sense for the state of Maryland, still respects the two major parties and respects people's choice to either vote independent ballot or a party ballot. But I'm open to any ideas that would work. Anything is better than the status quo. That's my argument.
Well, that's a great way to go out. Thank you, Delegate Qi, for joining us. Thank you for your leadership. If folks go to the chat, Kathy has put in information about how you can support her bill. And any final remarks before we leave you?
Yeah, I'd be remiss not to mention this. I actually have a book coming out called Elected American: From Red China to Blue Maryland, in which I detailed the extraordinary challenges of running my first campaign and how I have to explain democracy to people. As the conversation unfolded, I just suddenly thought I should at least let this group of people know, because you care so much about democracy and election, and you will understand. The book will be released in July, so it's not quite out yet, but you can follow the link to pre-order if you're interested, and I will be giving book talks later. But thank you for your engagement in democracy, because I feel our community's story needs to be told, and more people will understand this is not about politics. This is also about cultural inclusion and about building strong communities and the civic life.
Thank you, Delegate Qi. We'll make sure to put that a note about your book in our follow-up to this call. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Delegate Qi, for your leadership, and we look forward to seeing you on our next call next month. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.